Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to all of you on the occasion of the 8th Adenauer Conference on the role of Germany in international security affairs. I'm delighted to welcome you to this event, which will focus on these questions today and the two following days. I'm particularly happy to welcome the Federal Minister for National Defense, chairperson of the CDU, Mrs. Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer. In an interview, we are going to talk about the question what implications the current challenge of the COVID pandemic have for the current situation and the security and defense policy especially. This conference has become an institution in the annual program of the Adenauer Foundation. We deal with the same issues or similar issues year after year, again afresh, because the closer you look at it, you realize that you see these questions and issues in a different light and from a different perspective. Transatlantic relations, for example, are apparently less important than before, but obviously they have not become easier. The efforts to forge a stronger defense organization in Europe, a European architecture of defense, is not a discovery of this year, and it is more and more difficult to discuss the reasons why we are still talking about the current status of implementation which we have planned to tackle. We are also talking, for good reasons, about the shift of the international security architecture and Europe's role and the German position within Europe. Let me perhaps, before Dr. Pugliarin will moderate the conversation, she is the head of the Berlin office of the European Council on Foreign Relations. She's very familiar with the subject, but also with the foundation for many years. To begin with, I'd like to refer to the previous event of the Adenauer Foundation that took place 2 weeks ago with the Federal Chancellor, to talk about the German perspective about Germany's EU Council presidency and with regard to the defense and security policy. On the 27th of May this year, she declared, I quote, "Europe may emerge stronger from the crisis than it entered." In order to live up to this expectation, there is one leitmotif for me. That is European cohesion, European solidarity, especially in this family of European countries. I wish that the European Union, especially in times of crises, exercises solidarity and assumes more solidarity. This is not as harmless as it may sound, but it has a number of severe implications which we are going to talk about. Thank you very much indeed, Professor Lammert. Madam Minister, Professor Lammert, I'm delighted to be the moderator of this talk, the implications of the COVID crisis on the German defense policy. In order to console the viewers, I'd like to say it is great that we can meet in person here. Of course, we keep the distance of 1.50 meters. I also would like to thank you for all your many questions we have received in the run-up in the social media. Rest assured, I will respond to some of them. Madam Minister, let me start with you right away, with the implications of the corona crisis for the German defense policy. The consequences for our neighboring countries are not really recognizable, but developments in Russia or in Iran may create the impression that the situation has not become more stable due to the corona crisis. When you look around the security situation around Germany, how do you regard it? Where do we have to start from? First of all, we have to establish that the COVID pandemic has challenged us a lot in the previous weeks and months. Under the acute conditions of the pandemic, we had to fulfill our obligations in the alliance and in Germany, which we managed to do pretty well. Many of our soldiers have accepted many concessions, and also in cooperation with the European neighboring countries, we have achieved a lot. And we have learned in this crisis that in Europe, that countries like Russia, but also China, have tried to exploit this situation of alleged lack of solidarity among the European countries and to derive an advantage in terms of propaganda, also by means of fake news that has been spread. Interestingly enough, when we talked to our colleague in Australia, she has observed a similar phenomena with regard to China. That is to say, on the one hand, we have a special challenge at the moment that after Corona, when we enter into a more or less ordinary or normal situation and to learn lessons from the Corona crisis at the European level especially, and that countries like Russia, which officially deny the fact of the pandemic problem and hold their maneuvers, which is much of the concern of the European states. And as we also see it with regard to the operations in Iraq, where due to the Corona problem, our fight against Islamic terrorism is reduced. Consequently, this vacuum is exploited by the terrorists. In other words, Corona, with regard to security policies, has not allowed us any rest. We have more tasks to fulfill under special conditions at the moment. Let me straight come to this event tonight. Our viewers asked questions about Germany's special role in this specific situation when the American President Trump announced unexpectedly, not quite unexpectedly, to withdraw American troops from Germany. There were speculations whether this has something to do with the announcement of the Federal Chancellor not to travel to the USA for the summit meeting. The reason that was given was that Germany does not spend enough for military purposes. This was referred to as an attempt of extortion. Since you are in office and as you have observed with relations in the NATO and with regard to the cooperation with Macron, how reliable is the transatlantic cooperation now as before? And Germany says NATO is the core of our alliance. How reliable is NATO? Well, first of all, it is good to remember that throughout the period of the Cold War era, we were able to develop security, that we live today in freedom, and security has to do a lot with solidarity of the Western friends and the American friends, and the security guarantee of NATO. On the other hand, the only time when the mutual defense guarantee was invoked was the 9/11 tragedy, which brought us together to Afghanistan, where we are still today, and that cost a lot of lives of German soldiers as well, which is an operation we carry out together with American troops in Iraq in the fight against IS. This also shows clearly that the NATO is not a commercial organization, and security is not a commodity. NATO is based on solidarity and trust, and it is based on shared values and common interests. Today, now as before, we share these common interests perhaps much more than in the past. Therefore, NATO has a solid basis today as well. When we think of the American soldiers, we clearly have to say these soldiers in Germany and in Europe are guarantors of security for all NATO countries, for the entire alliance, and also they are guarantors for the security of the United States. And we can proudly say that these soldiers deployed in Germany have always been welcomed, and that's what these men and women do feel. Today we have a bit nervous time also in the relation with the US, and because of this I like to quote Voltaire, who said about friendship, the first law of friendship is that you have to foster it. And the second law is that you have to be tolerant, and when the first law is infringed. That is a good description of the American-German relations, perhaps. Thank you very much. My question is, with regard to Germany, I think Germany has to make some homework. Well, perhaps the American president used the wrong tone, and also the question of the 2% increase is debatable. But this is something the American President Trump has come up with for the first time. I think, to come back to the COVID crisis, isn't that a threat to our preparedness to spend 2% in times when we have to spend huge sums for the corona crisis? You're right, these are huge sums. We have enormous tasks to fulfill, and the promises we have made within NATO that 10% of the military capabilities are to be made available. This is a promise, and the remaining 90% have to be added by the other partners. This is the very interest of ours, having nothing to do with the president or America. This is our very interest. And the quality mark made in Germany means that promises are kept, and we have kept our promise. The previous federal government and the current government has re-emphasized this promise again and again. And in these tight times, these budgetary times after COVID, we stick to our budget, to our military budget until 2030. This is the plan. And there is another effect involved. When we talk about arms or equipment, we also talk about a core of German production, value creation, and many jobs, not only here, but throughout Europe as well. And it doesn't make sense to spend trillions to revamp the economy, and also in the defense sector, that is a contractor itself. I think this does not make sense to allow reductions, and therefore the economic package program will be continued also with regard to arms. One additional question, Mrs. Kramp-Karrenbauer. The Chancellor said in 2017 that the times when you can totally rely on the United States as a protector are over, and we have to do our own homework and have to secure our security ourselves more than before. Therefore, let me ask you again, do you think we still need an alternative plan B as Europeans with regard to defense to become more independent, and that the EU is expanded to become a defense union? What are your expectations of Germany's presidency in the EU Council? We definitely need a stronger cooperation in the field of defense and security policies, but not as an alternative and a plan B to NATO, but as a strengthening of the European pillar within NATO. We see in Europe that we want to be we want to hold the presidency, and we want to be capable of acting. When we analyze the situation, we have more plans then we can implement. There are plans to carry out joint peace facility projects and the joint defense fund. We are now talking about a budgetary title on military mobility. We will have launch joint initiatives, but all these individual items have to be summed up in a strategic context. This will be one of the challenging tasks during our Council presidency, and under the motto, what have we learned from Corona? The new lessons have to be integrated, and we have to find intelligent ways on how this European pillar can be integrated into NATO, that we avoid expensive double structures, but that we complement each other, that where European interests are to be safeguarded, like in the Sahel zone, that we are acting more efficiently as Europeans, perhaps with less help, or maybe at one time without any help from the US. Professor Lammert, we are talking about difficult questions, foreign operations, war and the federal army. We could add questions like nuclear participation or drone killers. These are unpleasant issues. Nevertheless, the Adenauer Foundation decided to identify these questions as core issues of discussions. Why do you think it is so important, especially for the Adenauer Foundation, and what role can the foundation play in this regard? Perhaps the hint is not superfluous to say that over centuries, prominent philosophers and theoreticians of the state doctrine have declared state security as the very purpose of the state. What is the purpose of the state? To provide security for its citizens. Today we see it in a much larger and comprehensive context, but the fact that this demand, this need, is not over is clear, I think, especially after the last years, and all the more so that many dreams that were dreamt 30 years ago, the event which we commemorated again this year especially, that these dreams have not come true, and a great deal of disillusionment followed. We said, in simplified terms, that the old security problem has come back, plus a number of additional problems we could not have imagined, in the form of semi-state security threats, international terrorism, organized in state-like fashions, or cyber crimes, cyber activities. Not only institutions, but also persons, not only in virtual terms, but also physically. By necessity, this means that a political institution dealing not with these questions, well, have to think of something special in order to prove one's own capability of making a judgment. For the Adenauer Foundation, this has been a traditional focal point of our activities. This event takes place for the 8th time, as I said, since you asked about the implementation of these projects, there are a diversity of formats, public ones, workshops, expert meetings, which are used to address these questions. In order to mention one of the latest initiatives, and one of the much attended security conference, we organized a youth workshop that aroused great interest among young people, and that confirmed our assumption that it is not a matter of one's mind, thought of some political professionals, but it is obviously an issue of great interest of many people. And this also leads to many more questions like should there be general conscription or not? So we will address these questions in future too. with the necessary amount of profoundness. Well, we are very thankful for these activities by the Adenauer Foundation. And one question that was raised in Military magazine: why are there so important meetings in the world at the same time, but at the European level and globally? We can observe that people and countries look at Germany more and more, not only because of the economic strength, but also in order to get to know more on how we are acting in the field of security and defense policies. We have many opinion polls that show that the interest among young people has grown, and that there is a greater awareness that Germany possibly should step up its commitment, which proves that the Adenauer Foundation really is rightfully discussing Germany's role in the world for 2 days in this respect. You said that the young generation does have a different perspective and is prepared to assume responsibility. Nevertheless, let me repeat the question, Mr. Lammert, not only in your capacity of the chairman of the foundation, but also after many years of a politician. Do you think that in the field of defense and the security policy enough items are sufficient? Could it be possible, for example, to do more?
Auf der Abstraktionsebene ist der Stellenwert eigentlich nicht.
Well, at the level of abstraction, this is not contested. At the level of details, things are becoming more difficult.
Von Altersversorgungsansprüchen oder von Betreuungsmöglichkeiten bei Krankheit oder Behinderung.
When it comes to illnesses or infrastructural issues, then we observe that this is a more popular investment than in the field of arms or defense or the Federal Army. And due to our history, we have a more difficult starting position as compared to the French or the British or the Poles, who in their own history have a less difficult situation to deal with. Therefore, you mentioned one of our own studies coming to the conclusion as that Germany, or whether Germany, when it comes to military capacities, should play a bigger role, or ought to play a bigger role. I think among the young people there are less prejudice than in the older generation. But the fact that there is no preparedness to address these questions among the young people and to discuss its consequences cannot be confirmed. Well, let me ask you the question when I talk to politicians and when I ask about the 2% expenditure level, a different answer could be given, and there might be the fear of a overpowering Germany. Is that a big political problem as regards the population that allegedly does not support foreign operations? Is this a problem of the establishment or of the population? Well, first of all, the problem is that we failed to talk enough about these questions in the past. What exactly is our own way of life all about, the fact that we are surrounded by friends only, and what that implies in terms of material and arms. This is an honest debate which we have to conduct among the people, but also with regard to the establishment or with regard to the Bundestag. So I think this argument that there are aversions on the side of other European countries once we would assume a greater responsibility are not true. Let us take the combat jet or the jet of the future. We are not talking about or a German arms project, but a Franco-German project or a European project. When we talk about submarines, we talk about a European cooperation. That is to say, with regard to arms and equipment, we are prepared and work in alliance with the entire group of the NATO members and the European countries.
Des gesamten Partners ist. Und es eher so ist, dass wir, die wir als starke Nation in der Mitte Europas und in der Mitte Europas liegen, dass eher geschaut wird, können sich Nationen auch ein Stück weit so als Art Framework
are confronted with the question whether
also ich erlebe das sehr stark, wenn ich mit
other countries are relying on us, like the Baltic states or the northern states, when we carry out NATO missions in Lithuania. Here they watch us and they want that Germany is playing a more committed role. Nevertheless, in the German political debate, defense debate, there seems to be a problem when we talk about the discussion about the tornado and arms exports and the question of armed drones. Let me ask Mr. Lammert, as a politician of many years, is this tradition a problematic one, or do you think that we can achieve something? Well, can we achieve something with regard to defense policies? That remains to be debated. What concerns me, this is a debate that has to be conducted. Part of our problem is that we have not discussed these issues for a long time, that we took things for granted for too long, because in times of the Cold War there was probably no great demand for more clarification. Well, after the Cold War, we could say, in a mirror reflection, that this topic was perhaps settled, and it is not easy to have it done. This can only be done in a public debate among the political class and in parliaments. This is part of the German tradition. Well, for the Chancellor and the responsible defense minister, this is not always an easy issue, I admit, but I think it has added to the acceptance of the armed forces in the German society. I think this is a question that is answering itself, whether the reconstruction of an army after the traumatic experiences of the German history, and that foreign missions of German troops abroad apparently do not serve our own interests, and that this could not have been possible without decisions of the Parliament. Well, but it is a constitutional decision, and this requires intelligent framework conditions. That has to be debated in public, and I should say, when in the next election campaign we will not have to discuss only light issues, but also difficult and diverging ones. Here the voters will express their preferences again.
Speaking about own interests, I would like to talk to you now, Mrs. Kramp-Karrenbauer. In your speech at Munich, you spoke about many things. You also addressed the fact that Germany has a task in the Pacific region and in China. If I explain this to my mother, that we have a security and defense task in these regions, it's not so easy for my mother to understand why I'm saying that. How would you explain that in these regions too we have a responsibility when it comes to security and defense, and we have to do more in this respect? Well, if I may say so, we may deploy here the experience gained with Corona. Internationally, we're all so much connected, intertwined. We have value creation chains, we have delivery chains, but then we find out that mask, which costs a couple of cents, becomes something that's relevant for the whole system and can be used for political purposes as well. So we have the debate in Europe going on these days because all the international links that we have, still how autonomous we need to be. If we look at the Indian Pacific region, there are a number of states that are like-minded, that is, they are sharing our values. Let's say Japan, Australia, Korea, New Zealand, Singapore, others. So they look to us, they look to Europe, they look to the NATO, and increasingly see China not only as an important partner in the region, as an important economic player, but also as a state in a competition of systems which fundamentally differs from what we do and what we prefer. So this is not only a system that is economically successful, but we have personal freedom as well, human rights, democracy, and this is what we guarantee to our populations. So if you talk to colleagues from the Indian Pacific region, you discuss with them, let's say on the phone, then the question is raised, if we share the same values, how do you then show your solidarity? Because there's also something like free transport over the ocean, so Germany is benefiting of free trade also across the ocean, so the desire is then voiced that Germany can then participate with a ship in missions in the Indian Pacific region, not in a military aggressive way, but to show a presence there in the first place. The NATO General Secretary said this quite rightly when he mentioned that we as NATO too have to look at how we are linked with these like-minded states. We have to think about it, because the question of how to deal with China, the way they are behaving, is experienced in these countries much more intensely than here in Europe. But Chinese behavior, we know, they are more than just an economic competitor, but it is actually ending up in a competition between systems. Speaking about the competition between systems, let us come back to one of our first questions today, talking about the American president. We see the competition going on between the United States and China, now aggravated because of the COVID crisis, and there are fears that when Joe Biden wins the next election, this topic would still be there. So Europe is fearing quite rightly that between the two poles it has to take a different position, a difficult position. So what do you think? Where should we position ourselves politically, and is our commitment in the Indian Pacific room also thanks to the fact that the Americans are actually demanding us taking a position there? Well, we are in security policy in particular, what shall I say, as a European continent, we are not neutral, we are not somewhere in between China and the United States, but we are linked because we have these common values, the transatlantic alliance in NATO, so this is why we stand at their side quite naturally. So what matters to me the most is that we have to make it clear that we are resilient, also when it comes to hybrid threats from Russia or China, does make a difference here. So the entire security issue in times of digitization, and we get prepared for it. This is something we get to be ready for. And we have to understand, we have to realize that issues of security and stability and prospects for the future in Africa are something that is in our own interest. We may withdraw and say, yeah, we don't care, nothing to do with us. But then we should not complain later on if China or other states gain an influence in this region. On the other hand, we may say we want to have the African states as partners by our side. We want to support them in the sense of our values, our interests, also in finding solutions to global problems like climate change. And then we have to commit ourselves to doing something. Let it be economically, when we speak about green hydrogen and partnership with the states in Africa. Speaking about hybrid threats, I have a question to Dr. Lammert in this connection. In the narrative that we hear from Russia, the work of political foundations in Russia, but other states as well, is seen as some sort of war. You are pursuing your policy of democracy, and you are destabilizing our system by the work you're doing. So sometimes they treat you as foreign agents, like the Adenauer Foundation has also encountered in Russia. How do you deal with it? Well, in actual fact, for a number of years we have noticed that more and more countries have interfered with the activities of international organizations in their countries, administratively or legally, that is. And in every single case, we have to look into the details, whether under the conditions, the legal and other conditions in this particular country, a meaningful work will still be possible or not. So the competence of the respective state, of course, to shape and regulate the conditions in this country cannot be denied. Of course, they have the right to shape their own legislation. But then on the other hand, we have the freedom to say, under these conditions, we think that the cooperation makes sense or doesn't make sense. So we are not a government organization, we're not a party, but instead we are organizations that are there for the transfer of experience and values and convictions. We are very much suited to transfer these values. This is now a task we either find partners for or don't find partners for. And what we increasingly find now is there are partners in the country, but the respective country does not like this type of cooperation. So we have to see whether or not we can then continue our work in such a country. But this is much more than what we expected 25 years ago. So we have systems fighting at this level as well. This is one of the new unpleasant insights we have won in recent time. But how are the foundations then acting in this competition between systems when you are working in such countries? What's your work in Russia, let's say, in concrete terms, or in other countries that are difficult from our point of view? What can you do there as a foundation? What can you reach? Well, let me take the example of China. There's no doubt we have very restrictive conditions in China for our work, and we have to think of the legitimate interests and concerns of our partners in these countries and make sure that we do not develop activities which are disliked by the respective government. So we are not organizing a demonstration or calling up people to overthrow the governments, but our partners are media houses or companies or startups in such countries, or maybe social groups, religious communities, they may be, where different projects are then pursued, which we develop with them But in order to come back to the other aspect Mrs. Kramp-Karrenbauer has mentioned earlier today, the Adenauer Foundation has had an office in Australia for 3 years now. So we have an office there, and even in our headquarters, people ask, why is that? Do we have a problem with Australia? Why do we need an office there? So, and it is true, but this is not what should determine our actions. This is a very important partner country which is geographically far away from us, but politically they are part of the democratic family. So we have disregarded them as partners. They have an interest in this dialogue as we have, and therefore we have to come back and see from time to time what new networks can be made up. What connections can we create, and in other cases we have to look at, in this particular case, can it be done at all? If the conditions are somewhat restricted, we have to take a decision as what restrictions can we tolerate in order to be able to do some serious work in this country. Yes, one of the topics that our viewers have very much thought about is how well the Bundeswehr, the German army, is positioned these days. So are we capable, operational, conditionally or not conditionally, unconditionally? So my question to you is, we have now a new commissioner for the Bundeswehr, a report will be published soon. Do we have to be afraid of this report? Well, the reports of the commissioner of the Bundeswehr, whoever it is, are so important because this commissioner has a very critical perspective from outside and tells us where the real issues are. This is very important for me as well, because what I want to do is I want to improve the Bundeswehr. We need operational capable Bundeswehr. So when we speak about the will of the people working in the Bundeswehr, they are top, they are so willing, but when we speak about the material background, that needs, we have to do something. So I want to show you, or I want to mention here, if you do not work hard enough for many years, you think this is the end of history, we have only friends around us, so you start savings, and over years you save and save, but then over time you find it's very difficult then to redress this and build up more to become a premium client at arms corporations, which we have not dealt with for so many years. How difficult it is to build up structures in order to get material that we need for our army in a short time. Since 2014 we have made more money available for the defense budget, and I'm really grateful for this situation, but so far this money has not been spent quickly enough and not as it would have been best. And therefore, this year we have started a new initiative for operational capability. So we want to look at how can we improve our work as the Bundeswehr, but on the other hand, also we talk to the corporations, the arms corporations, say, we are one of your key accounts, so we expect high quality from you. So this in fact meant that material that was delivered to us and which was not top quality was rejected. So something's going on here in this relationship, but it's hard work waiting for us, and we should take this as a warning in a discussion when we look at the COVID pandemic, not to fall into such a pattern again and say in these difficult times everything matters and internal and external security does not matter so much or do not matter so much now. Well, but when you have a threat like COVID, once you are in the situation, you realize what you are lacking, what's not there, what has not been done in the past, what has been reduced in the past. Yes, there are so many reports about what does not swim or fly in the Bundeswehr, my question would be a different one. How prepared are we for the future? They keep telling us, you prepare your arms for the last war or the last operation. So we've had discussions for a while. Everything was targeted towards Afghanistan. Territorial defense came then as a threat back. So what about AI-controlled drones then in the Bundeswehr? Well, these two levels, these are two levels we're working at. Especially, we have to prepare for operational capability. Currently, we have to have all the material we need to be capable, and that also means that we've modernized and replaced material. But the other level is the point that you've just mentioned here. So, what are the threats of the future? What's waiting for us here? And the systems that we will need in the future, we have to be prepared for them. So when we speak about air defense in the future, we do not speak about some modernized air defense as we have it today, but we rather speak about air defense which has to be able to have a 360-degree observation to stop drones, hypersonic weapons. They have to be dealt with, and this is also what we research on. We want to learn about how to defend ourselves against this. When I speak about airstrike, FCAS, or also ground strikes, the tank of the future, these are the systems that we will need in the future, also using autonomous systems. Man and machine have to come together here and act. So this is the perspective we take today, we have to take today, and yet we have to be prepared for the moment to have this operational capability. Yeah, I would like to ask one more question. In German politics, there's the tendency, which we also see in the European Union, France, for instance, they do things outside NATO, but also outside the European Union. So the European Intervention Initiative is one example of such an European initiative, but it is to be expanded. And also the France-led initiative in the Strait of Hormuz. So many discussions have been led about this, and we always come to the point where we say it's very difficult for Germany to join a mission which is not classically taking place within the alliance. So do you think that we should become more courageous here and take more the path that the French are taking now? When we look at the coalition of the willing, so 2018, this has been discussed, but Germany is actually not prepared to do this. Do you think we should be more courageous here? Well, first and foremost, what France is doing right now in the Sahel zone is a very important part of the robust fight against terrorism. And this is true for both the Barkhane mission and the Takuba mission. Germany has now, in the past, focused on different issues. We said we support in the international coalition against IS terror. We support this fight, but we support it by doing air reconnaissance, for instance, by helping in mid-air refueling. So we say our approach is we start out from a long-term or longer-term commitment, and we say in the Sahel zone, for instance, we want to help in the construction of structures and support the forces, the local force, because you need both an acute struggle, but also the longer-term perspective. I think, and I totally agree with Norbert Lammert here, from our history, from the past, it makes a lot of sense, and it is quite good that we are a parliamentary army. So we need a clear mandate then, and this mandate makes it clear that we can act when it comes to missions which were started by the UN, NATO or the European Commission. So I would really wish these coalitions that you have, international coalitions, we want to be part of these alliances. When we look at Iraq, for instance, and we speak about the training which we provide as part of the coalition of the willing in the fight against IS, we are now also in the situation where the US are reducing their armed forces there. It makes sense that we participate in a mandate like this and participate and continue our training there. So in Iraq, where you have humanitarian, a very difficult situation, we have now had the possibility to join in, but I would really wish to have a situation where these missions can be participated in much more often. You spoke about the parliamentary reservations, you spoke about the responsibility we have because of our history. And do you think that our criteria perhaps have to be reconsidered? Because people are telling Germany so often, politically we support issues, but we never support them militarily. Yes, this needs to grow over time, but my impression is that it is really growing now. We spoke about the different views or perspectives of various age groups when it comes to a stronger German commitment in security issues. It is my impression that this fundamental point that no German soldier will be deployed without the consent of the German parliament that was elected by the German people. I think this has contributed a lot to making good decisions which are highly debated at the beginning. So when you come to such issues and when we look back on our history, these are highly controversial decisions and they will remain like this for the future, because people may expect that the government is going mad and getting it all wrong and taking a decision which will not be accepted in society. But it makes a difference when then you have a parliament which is mirroring the political preferences of a society. So they are still discussing such issues controversially, but at the end, not always, but very often with broad majorities, they take their decisions. So when you look at it from the executive perspective and criticize that the parliament has the last word, they overlook that these debates surprisingly often produce larger majorities in the end than we had at the beginning of the whole debate. Yes, let me add here, I, as Minister of Defense, would not want to change this principle. It does not mean that, actually there have been considerations in the past and suggestions for reform, so that does not mean that minor changes are not possible within a mandate, maybe to have an easier way of handling such minor changes. But then again, you must not forget that the operations where we send our soldiers are dangerous and they deserve the backing of the German parliament, which was elected by the German people. So maybe it's a bit complicated sometimes to discuss matters profoundly, but for the soldiers of the Deutsche Bundeswehr, it's really important that they are sent to their deployments with the support of the German people. We are almost coming to the end now. Let me ask you a personal question, Minister. You've been in this position for about 1 year now. How has your relationship to the soldiers, to the troop, changed or not? Has it not changed? Well, before I took over my office, I had a very high respect of the Bundeswehr. All men and women, the soldiers working in the Bundeswehr, but also in the civilian areas there, they are doing an excellent job. But ever since I've been in the position of Minister of Defense, I have learned much more about the various activities of the army. I've seen for myself, even now during the corona pandemic, what the readiness of the troops is to come in. You know, I've seen for myself what's it like when you have a hot country, 40 degrees centigrade, and you are in Iraq, and I was just, I had just a light outfit. and they are not complaining, they're doing all this. Since then, my respect has increased significantly, even more than I thought. I can say that the German citizens can be glad and also be proud of the German Bundeswehr. Yeah, my very last question. When you took office, in your speech you also spoke about some of your plans. What's your balance now after 1 year in office? What have you found out? What are your insights now? Well, there's still bright and dark sides. So we have reached a lot when we speak about the social acceptance. So the soldiers were sworn in front of the Deutsche Reichstag. That was very impressive. And also the soldiers can use the railways free of charge. That was quite impressive, and they actually got very positive reactions to their uniforms on the trains. That was not expected by everyone before. So we do not have all the material capabilities we would like to have. This is what I know. So we are pushing forward with that, and the debate is going on about what role do we want to play in the world, where do we see our responsibility, where within 1 year only all this could not be covered, and I myself would have wished we could have reached more, but I had to realize it's slower, but it's a challenge for me. It's encouraging me to work even harder. Thank you very much. That takes us to the end of this meeting. Thank you very much for being here today and giving us these long and complex answers. I wish both of you the best for your work in the German defense policy and many other fields. And thanks to you for listening and watching. That was the 8th Adenauer Conference, panel 1. We will continue tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, where we'll deal with more topics, transatlantic relations and NATO. And tomorrow we will deal with EU, and the day after tomorrow, transatlantic relations. We will also speak tomorrow about the German presidency of the EU Council. And where are we now? We will have very interesting debates here for you, so please join us again tomorrow and the day after.